Hey guys, it's Kevin in my review for Gretel and Hansel. And so what Gretel and Hansel is essentially about is it's basically a retelling of the classic Hansel and Gretel story, only this time around Gretel is much older. She is very quickly settling into womanhood, and she also feels very protective over her brother. And so one day they stumble across this cottage, and you guys pretty much know how it goes down from there. You know, they meet this witch, and this witch starts enticing them with all this various candy and tries to get them to stay and things like that. And basically the rest of the film is them trying to get out of this house, but also being tempted by the witch and also uncovering that, her sinister agenda, and that's really all there is to say. So, Gretel and Hansel overall, look, when it comes to a horror film that's released in January, it's not usually a very good sign, but with a film like Gretel and Hansel, I actually did see a lot more potential in this film, because unlike the other two horror releases of this month, that being The Grudge and The Turning, both as we know were hot garbage, this actually looked like it could be something legitimately different. It could have been something that was legitimately challenging in that way. And especially coming from the director, Oz Perkins, who, I finally sat down and got to watch his most famous film, The Black Coat's Daughter, before this film. And my God, what a powerful film that is. It's so tragic and emotional and sinister, and oh my God, he just did an amazing job directing that film. And so after seeing that, I was very excited to see how this movie would turn out. This did not seem like something where, they just plucked him out from horror obscurity. It did not seem like that's what this was going to be at all. It really seemed like this could have been something really great, and it was pretty disappointing. Now, look, I don't want to come off like I hate this movie, because I don't. There actually is quite a bit to admire about this film. In fact, the problems with this movie are not the type of issues that I have in other horror films that came out this year. This film is much more competently made, all that kind of stuff. It's more just in terms of what we could have gotten here. This is a much more simplistic and by the numbers film than I really was expecting it to be. Unfortunately, we're just getting to right now, starting off with the cast. And going into this film, I think that's definitely going to be one of the biggest draws for most people, especially when it comes to its main lead. And Sophia Lillis here is predictably great. She does a very good job as the main character, Gretel. Gretel is someone who is going through quite a bit of a transformation in this film, and Lillis does a really good job with it. She carries it quite well. You buy every single emotion that she's selling, and she also really does help, I think, elevate it. Even though the character of Gretel, we'll get into in a little bit, Lillis does a really great job here, and I thought that she was definitely one of the best parts about it, but she's actually not the standout for me. The real standout of this film is actually Alice Krige, or Krieg. I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce her last name, but she plays the witch, and she was fantastic. I thought she stole every single scene that she was in, especially just because of how inviting she comes off. And even though if you know the story of Hansel and Gretel, you know the witch is up to no good, you're still able to buy into it. You're still able to kind of buy into the fact that the witch generally cares about these two. You almost kind of fool yourself into believing it because of how good she is in this role. She steals every single scene that she's in. She is very charismatic in that way, and she's also very creepy. Like, she exudes a sense of terror and a sense of creepiness, and I just thought she did such a incredible job with that here. I thought that she was so great in the film. The dynamic between her and Lillis is rock solid, and by far one of the best things about this film for sure. Now, as far as the rest of the cast goes, there really is not a lot to say because they're not in it that much. The actor playing the huntsman, really only in it for one scene, not much to say about him. Unfortunately, though, the one performance that, and I hate having to shit on him, but the actor that just did not work for me is the child actor playing Hansel, Sam Leakey. I just did not think he was very good in this film. I don't think he was bad necessarily, but he just felt very inexperienced. He just didn't really feel like he was on the same level, and maybe it's because he was, sharing scenes with Sophia Lillis, and, she's such a better actress, and she's so much more experienced that it really sticks out, but I just did not think he did a very good job here. He didn't sell his emotions very well. It came off very fake to me, and he didn't necessarily ruin the movie, but he definitely did lessen a lot of the scenes that he was in, and I just didn't think he did that great of a job. But aside from him, the acting is pretty good overall. But now we get to the directing and the writing, which unfortunately, this is where things get a bit clunky. The directing, I don't think, is the issue, though. Oz Perkins did, in fact, direct this film, like I said, and I do think he did a good job. I think you can watch this movie and it doesn't feel like one of those things where, he didn't direct it. That's the case with, like, The Grudge or something like that. All the hallmarks of a Oz Perkins film is there. This film is aggressively art house in that way. It is trying to be as non-conventional as possible. It has a very dark and, sinister feel. It's very somber. It's very, eerie in that way. So I think he definitely had the right tone here. I felt like this was a director that had a vision. And I can't believe I'm saying about a movie in January, let alone a horror film, but I will give it to Perkins. He very much did have a vision here. You can tell what he was trying to go for. I think the real problem, though, is the script, and I think the biggest issue is that he is not in charge of the script here. Every other film that Oz Perkins has done, he has both written and directed. This is the first time he has not been involved in that side of things, and I do think that was a big mistake because as a result, the script here just feels very underwritten and it feels very safe in that way. And that's not at all what Perkins is. And the thing that's so disappointing about it is that I don't feel like this had to be a safe movie. You could say, oh, well, this wasn't trying to be as deep, but I feel like it was. I feel like there were definitely themes in this movie that do work quite well. The character of Gretel, especially, they're clearly trying to go for something really different with her. In fact, I would say the first 20 or 30 minutes of this movie, it seemed like they were going in a direction similar to The Witch, the movie with Anya Taylor-Joy, directed by Robert Eggers. It very much seemed like they were going down that path. She is constantly being tempted by the witch to turn against her brother, that she doesn't need him, things like that. But also the witch is kind of making her feel like she has her own place in the world. She's opening her up to other opportunities that she didn't know she had. And I thought that was a really cool idea. I wanted to see them explore that relationship more, and I thought they could do stuff there. A really good example of this is when Gretel first gets there and, she's talking to Hansel and, basically the witch refers to Gretel as a young woman, and Gretel doesn't think that she is, a woman. She thinks, and Hansel doesn't think that he doesn't see his sister as a teenager. He still sees her as like a child, and, the witch responds, what do you think Gretel is then? So it's clear they were trying to go for this liberating theme about independence, about, the loss of innocence. But unfortunately, that theme is not that well communicated in this film. There are scenes that do work, and there are scenes that feel like that is what they're trying to go for. But the problem is they don't really go for that because literally a scene later, you'll have a scene where 1 second Gretel feels like she's ready to turn against Hansel, and then suddenly it just becomes her trying to rescue Hansel, and it becomes a fairly more conventional narrative, and that was very disappointing to me because I felt like there was a really dark and twisted direction you could have gone with this, and they just didn't, and that's what's so disappointing about this movie. It's not so much that I needed something deeper than what it was. I feel like the film was trying to be that, but I feel like it just wasn't overall. It wasn't for some reason as well communicated as it should have been. I think a big reason for that is just there's so many things that this film skips over, and it's not so much because of the editing, which I'll get into. A lot of it is based on this over-reliance on narration that is so consistent in the movie to the point of ad nauseum. I mean, Gretel will constantly just keep going on these long tangents and pontificating about everything and telling us stuff that is completely obvious. It almost felt like this movie knew that even though it was trying to be really artsy, it knew it had to appeal to wider audiences, so it just tried to dumb it down for them, and that is the worst thing you can do with a film like this. That is how you alienate your audience. That's honestly, I found it pretty patronizing, and it really started to annoy me after a while. It was like, why is this narration still happening? And not only that, they also use it as a convenient way to skip so many key scenes in the movie that I really would have wanted to see. There's a whole section here where they're with this hunter, and we only get to see one scene of that, but from what Gretel tells us through narration, there was a lot more that went down there. Same with the witch. When they first enter the cottage, it feels like they're going to be here for a while, but because Gretel is narrating everything, you don't feel like time is passing by. You don't feel like they've been here for all that long. It feels like they've just gotten here and now they're just going to get out of here very quickly. But in reality, from Gretel's narration, it tells us that a lot of time has passed and you just don't really feel that here. And again, I attribute all of that to the narrative. It's not very well written. It's very simplistic in that way. There's also just a lot of things that they reveal in the third act that just don't really make a lot of sense. There's one monologue that the witch has that she gives to Gretel, and I was like, wait, what? Is that really how it's gonna go? Like, what are you trying to say? Like, I didn't really understand what they were trying to do there. So again, I don't want you guys to think I was like bored with this narrative because I really wasn't. I was actually very intrigued in where they were going to go. They just, after a certain point, I realized this film wasn't going to go anywhere that interesting. And that really did let me down, I have to say, especially in the climax, which is the safest shit possible. I will say, though, it is very refreshing to see a horror film that is devoid of jump scares. It is devoid of horror cliches. This clearly is trying to be something far more on like an A24 side of things. And I like that. I just wish they utilized that more because I don't really feel like they did here, and that's disappointing for me. Now, look, the one thing I think everyone can collectively agree on, regardless if you like this film or not, is the cinematography. It is drop dead gorgeous here. There are so many just amazing shots in this film, some just incredible production design, and I think they did a really good job with that. There are some camera movements, though, that do look a little wonky. It feels like they went a little overboard with that, like they were trying to make the movie look more special than it was, and that did get a little bit annoying. There's a little too many close-ups and zooms and things like that, and you could have maybe eased up on that a bit. Focus more on the story and less on the technical side of things, which again is masterful. I love the cinematography in this movie, and that alone looks like an Oz Perkins film. It's really just the script. And then the other thing I will say is the score in this movie is fantastic. It's very synthy. It's very, like, atmospheric in that way. But my problem is, I just don't really feel like, as good as the score is, which it's great, I love the score in this movie, I don't really feel like it fits in this film. And that's very disappointing because it's such an effective and powerful score. But the scenes in question, when, this score is going on, it just doesn't really fit. It's something so mundane, and I feel like this score should have been saved for something more epic and, like, in scale. And it just wasn't. So it's very disappointing because I love the score. I'm definitely going to be listening to the score on its own for sure, but I don't really feel like it fits in this movie, unfortunately. And the other biggest problem with the film, without a doubt, is the editing. This film is way too short. And look, Black Coat's Daughter is only like an hour and 30 minutes, but I really do feel this film would have benefited from being at least an hour 40. I think if they would have had at least 20 more minutes, they really could have given us something great here. You could have had a lot more time to delve into Hansel and Gretel before they leave because we really don't get enough time there. The third act especially would not feel nearly as rushed and lazy as it does, and just in general, I think we could have gotten a much better film here. And look, I always say, make your film as long or as short as it needs to be, but I really just don't understand why this film was only 80 something minutes long. It's way too short. There's not a lot that happens in terms of a narrative, and I just wish that they would have spent a lot more time on it. So again, I don't hate Gretel and Hansel or anything. There's a lot that I actually do like about very strong performance from Sophia, Lillis, and Alice Krige. Some really interesting themes, but overall, it just left me feeling very cold. I walked out of this movie just really thinking about how much better this could have been. There was so much more they could have delved into here. You really could have played up more on Gretel becoming part of this colony, discovering her own kind, turning against her brother, maybe even turning towards darkness a bit. I don't know, there's so much more you could have done with this, and unfortunately, what we get here is just a very a very conventional, not a conventional film. I don't want to say it's conventional because it's very different from most horror films, but it's just a very standard and safe film that I really feel could have been a lot more, especially if Perkins was behind the script. I think that would have demonstrably improved the film for sure. So unfortunately, I am going to give Gretel and Hansel overall a C+. It's definitely way better than both of the horror films we've gotten this year for sure, definitely. But it is absolutely the first big disappointment of the year for me, unfortunately, which is very sad to say the least. But either way, guys, you have seen Gretel and Hansel. Most guys saw this movie overall. Lift your thoughts, and we'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.